Why was everyone starring? That's what Emma Hayes kept asking herself as she crossed the scorching sands of Fort Thunder. 47 degrees Celsius. No wind. Just heat so heavy it shimmered off the ground and bent the air like glass. She could feel their eyes on her, 30 of them. 30 candidates for special operations selection, all muscle and ego, standing in formation like they already believed they'd been chosen for greatness. Emma, on the other hand, looked like she didn't belong at all. Her faded uniform was worn at the edges, her boots were scuffed, and her brown hair was pulled into a no-nonsense bun. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here for something else, something only she knew. "Take off that uniform," a voice barked across the training grounds. Immediately. The sound hit her like a bullet, sharp, commanding, filled with contempt. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, 26, built like the desert itself, harsh, proud, and unforgiving. The laughter that followed came like an echo. 30 voices, all amused by the spectacle of an older woman being challenged in a world ruled by youth. Emma stopped moving. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. The tremor in her right hand, the one that had never fully healed, twitched against her thigh, but her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "I said," Morrison shouted again, stepping forward, "take it off. Civilians have no right wearing a uniform." He stood over her, tall and burning with authority, his shadow falling across her face. But it wasn't his words that cut, it was the laughter. The young soldiers smirking, their phones already recording, waiting for the humiliation to unfold. Emma slowly set her backpack on the ground. The movement was deliberate, controlled. Every second stretched thin under the weight of their mockery. "Is this a joke?" one of the candidates whispered to his friend. "She looks like somebody's aunt who got lost on base." Another one, Rodriguez, chuckled. $10 says she's here to teach us diversity training." Their arrogance filled the air like gunpowder before a match. Emma began to unbutton her jacket. At first, there was nothing remarkable about it. Just an old woman complying with an order she didn't deserve. But the quiet that followed was heavier than the heat. Because as her jacket slipped off her shoulders, the air itself seemed to stop. The laughter died, phones lowered. No one breathed. There across her back stretched a black skull, cold and exact, with the Roman numeral II carved beneath it. Around it, 12 crimson stars burned like wounds. And below that, 3 words: Death Brigade, sole survivor. For a moment no one understood, then one man did. Master Sergeant Viktor Vyulov, former Spetsnaz advisor, 30 years in covert operations, went pale. He'd seen things most men couldn't name, but the sight of that tattoo drained the color from his face. He whispered something in Russian that sounded like a prayer, then he dropped to one knee. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that doesn't come from discipline, it comes from fear. Lieutenant Morrison's jaw tightened. What the hell is this? No one answered. The morning had started like any other at Fort Thunder. A briefing, a heat wave, a collection of the best soldiers in the country, all thinking they were untouchable. Emma had arrived quietly, parking her beaten-up pickup in the visitor's lot. The paint was peeling, the windshield cracked. She didn't fit in with their polished uniforms or perfect gear. Private Jessica Stone, the base's social media darling, had noticed her first. "Oh my God, guys," she whispered into her phone, streaming live to thousands of followers. "You have to see this. Some old lady just showed up wearing BDUs like she bought them at a thrift store. This is going to be hilarious." Her followers laughed through the comments. They didn't know they were watching the most classified operator alive. Emma signed in at the gate, her trembling hand barely noticeable as she presented contractor credentials. The guard waved her through without a glance. She made her way to the weapons table, where rifles, magazines, and gear were laid out for inspection. The soldiers ignored her until they saw how she moved. Her hands, though shaky, handled each weapon with the kind of care that came from habit, not hesitation. She checked chambers, examined firing pins, reassembled parts with mechanical precision. Sergeant Mike Davis, the instructor, watched her for a moment, annoyance hardening his voice. "Ma'am, this area's for candidates and staff only. Whatever admin work you're here for, it needs to go through proper channels." Emma didn't even look up. "I'm here on authorization from Colonel Patterson," she said quietly, her voice rough, as if scarred by smoke and time. "Observing the selection process." "Observing," Morrison echoed, his tone sharp as broken glass. "You mean interfering?" He stepped closer. "Lady, do you have any idea where you are? This is a special operations selection course, not a field trip." Emma stayed silent. The desert wind tugged at her jacket. Jake's patience broke. "What gives you the right to wear that uniform?" She finally turned her head just slightly, enough for him to see the faint scar running from her temple down to her jaw. It was old, too precise to be an accident. "This uniform," she said evenly, "was issued to me." "By who?" "The Salvation Army," Rodriguez called out, earning a laugh from the others. Even Davis smirked. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is restricted ground. If you want a cosplay soldier, do it off base." A ripple of laughter ran through the group. Then Brad Tucker, the Joker, decided to add fuel. He accidentally bumped the table Emma was inspecting, sending gear crashing to the dirt. Whoops! Guess that's what happens when civilians mess with real tools. Emma crouched, quietly picking up each piece. She checked for damage, wiped the dust off with her sleeve, and placed everything back with meticulous care. Vyulov, watching from the sidelines, frowned. That wasn't the movement of a civilian. That was training, deep muscle memory. Jake Morrison wasn't done. He tasted power and wanted more. "I gave you an order," he said, voice rising. "Take off that uniform." The laughter returned, thinner this time, almost nervous. Emma looked up at him, eyes calm and steady. "You want me to remove it," she said softly. "Now," he demanded. Phones came out again. Jessica whispered into her stream, "He's actually making her do it. This is going to blow up online." Emma exhaled once, a quiet, controlled breath, and began unbuttoning her jacket. The desert sun caught her hair as the fabric slipped from her shoulders. And then the tattoo appeared. At first it was just a shape. Then the skull. Then the Roman numeral. Then the 12 red stars. The air changed. The laughter died mid-breath. Sergeant Vyulov's hands began to shake. His mouth opened, and for the first time in years he looked afraid. He sank to one knee, whispering, "Bage-moi, Death Brigade." Jake blinked. "Sergeant, what are you doing?" Vyulov didn't answer. He stared at the tattoo like it was a ghost. Jake turned back to Emma, trying to mask his confusion with anger. "It's just a tattoo," he snapped. "Some kind of unit mark, probably fake." But his voice lacked conviction now. "Fake?" Vyulov's voice cracked as he rose, face ashen. "Lieutenant, that emblem doesn't belong to any regular unit. It's the mark of Death Brigade II, the ones from Operation Hellgate." No one spoke. Jessica lowered her phone. Even Davis took a step back. 13 went in, Vyulov said quietly. Only one came out. His gaze met Emma's. "Your ghost 7. Jake frowned, the name meaning nothing to him, but it meant everything to everyone who knew. Colonel Patterson emerged from the command post, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on here?" Vyulov saluted sharply. "Sir, we need to clear the area." "I'll decide what's necessary on my base," Patterson replied, but when his eyes landed on Emma, tattoo, his expression changed. "Ma'am, identification, please." Emma opened her backpack. Her fingers, still trembling, produced a weathered leather wallet. She handed over an ID, a folded authorization letter, and a small black challenge coin. The colonel froze. The coin bore the same skull and numeral. Red enamel filled the eyes, and the words Death Brigade II, Hellgate gleamed faintly in the sun. Patterson whispered, "Only 13 of these were ever made." He looked up, his voice trembling, "and 12 were buried." Then, almost reverently, "You're her Ghost 7. For the first time, Emma looked him in the eye. Her expression was calm, detached, almost tired. "I was," she said quietly. The crowd was still. The same soldiers who had mocked her that morning now stood as if facing something they couldn't define, something older, heavier, beyond rank or reason. Jake's lips parted, but no words came. Emma reached for her jacket and began to put it back on. "You asked me to take it off," she said. "Now you know why I wore it." The silence that followed wasn't just shame, it was transformation. The laughter was gone, the arrogance stripped away. And somewhere deep inside that desert base, the ghosts of 12 soldiers seemed to rise with the heat, unseen but felt, standing once more beside their survivor. The moment Emma Hayes buttoned her jacket, the wind picked up, carrying the faintest echo of words once whispered on battlefields far away. "Death Brigade never dies, they just go darker." "Clear the training ground," Colonel Patterson ordered, his voice sharp enough to slice through the stunned silence. "Now." The 30 candidates hesitated, unsure whether to salute, speak, or breathe. No one moved until Patterson barked again, "That's an order." Boots scraped against sand. The crowd dispersed in uneasy silence, leaving behind the woman they'd mocked, the lieutenant who'd humiliated her, and the few instructors who suddenly wished they'd stayed quiet. Only the sound of the wind remained, a restless, hollow wind that carried heat and guilt. Emma stood exactly where she'd been when the world changed around her. The sun hammered down on her shoulders, glinting off the faint sheen of sweat on her neck. Her tattoo, now hidden again beneath the uniform, seemed to radiate weight, not color. Colonel Patterson turned to her. "Major Hayes, I need to see you in my office, immediately." She nodded once, collected her pack, and followed him across the training yard. Jake Morrison stood frozen as she passed. The same lieutenant who demanded she strip off the uniform now couldn't meet her eyes. She paused beside him, her voice calm, not cruel. "You did what you were trained to do," she said. "Challenge what doesn't belong." Then, after a quiet beat, "Just make sure next time you know what does." She walked on, and he stood there, rooted to the ground, feeling the heat rise not from the desert, but from the shame burning under his skin. Inside Patterson's office, the blinds were drawn against the sun. The air smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. Victor Vyulov stood near the wall, arms folded, face pale. His usual iron composure had cracked. Patterson shut the door and turned toward Emma. "Major Hayes, I'll be honest, I never thought I'd see you again." Emma placed her pack on the floor, her hands trembling slightly from old nerve damage. "Neither did I," she said softly. Vyulov finally spoke. "Hellgate," he whispered. "They said no one survived." Almost no one. Emma's eyes were distant, remembering the screams, the explosions, the long night that had buried 12 soldiers and one survivor beneath a mountain of fire. Patterson leaned on his desk. "You're supposed to be retired, medical discharge, officially dead." Emma's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Officially. The paperwork says I died in Operation Hellgate. I didn't correct it." The colonel exchanged a look with Vyulov, half disbelief, half awe. "You shouldn't be here," Patterson said finally. "You're a ghost, Emma." "That's the point," she replied. "Ghosts can walk in where others can't." He studied her for a long moment. "Then why are you really here?" Emma took a slow breath, her voice steady. "Because another Hellgate is coming. Different field, same stakes, and I need to know if there are still soldiers alive who understand what that means." Patterson frowned. "You came here for recruitment." "Selection," she corrected. "The kind that isn't on any record, the kind that doesn't survive the mission." The colonel exhaled, jaw tight. You're talking about rebuilding Death Brigade. Emma nodded once. Vyulov crossed himself quietly. You mean to form a new unit after what happened? Not to repeat it, she said, to make sure no one else ever has to. Later that afternoon, word spread through Fort Thunder like wildfire. The civilian contractor was no contractor. She was a war legend, the kind of name whispered in training stories, half myth, half classified rumor. Ghost 7. The only survivor of the most secret operation ever executed by U.S. Special Operations Command. But among the candidates, the knowledge didn't come with relief. It came with dread. Because every one of them knew, if she was here, it meant something catastrophic was on the horizon. Private Jessica Stone, the one who'd live-streamed the confrontation, sat alone in her barracks, staring at the paused video on her phone. Her hands trembled as she hit delete. In her gut, she knew this wasn't the kind of story anyone should see. Emma spent the next few hours alone in the observation deck overlooking the range. Below, the candidates ran drills in silence, their usual swagger gone. The desert shimmered with heat, the air vibrating with tension. Viktor Vyulov joined her quietly. He didn't salute, didn't need to. They're afraid of you, he said. They should be, she replied. He studied her profile, the lines etched by years of war, the faint tremor in her hand she tried to hide by clasping it behind her back. I saw the footage once, he said. Hellgate, the satellite feed before it went dark, 13 operators against an army, then nothing. For years I wondered who made it out. I should have guessed. Emma didn't respond. She just kept watching the soldiers below, their neat formations, their rehearsed confidence. Do you know what broke us, Victor? It wasn't the fire, it wasn't the enemy. It was the silence that came after. Command stopped responding. Reinforcements never came. Every minute another voice went quiet, until it was just me. Vyulov said nothing. The desert wind carried her words away. Finally, she turned to him. I'm not here to haunt them, Victor. I'm here to see who's still human when the silence starts again. When evening came, the Arizona sky burned orange and red, like embers scattered across the horizon. The heat gave way to cold wind that cut through fabric and pride alike. In the mess hall, the air was heavy with unease. Conversations died when Emma entered. Even the instructors looked up, unsure whether to stand or look away. She moved to a corner table, took a seat, and began eating the way soldiers do, quickly, mechanically, without thought. Jake Morrison approached. He hesitated halfway, hand flexing at his side, then squared his shoulders and walked the rest of the way. Ma'am. Emma looked up slowly. I came to apologize, he said. His voice was low, unsteady. This morning was predictable, she interrupted. He blinked. Ma'am. You acted exactly how I expected, she said, her tone even. Aggressive, arrogant, certain of your superiority. That's what command trains into you, Lieutenant, until the first time the world reminds you you're mortal. He looked down, ashamed. It won't happen again. Good, Emma said. Then, after a pause, tell me, Lieutenant, have you ever been afraid? The question hit him harder than her earlier words. Yes, ma'am, first deployment. We got hit by an IED, lost 2 men. And I froze for 3 seconds, then training kicked in. We secured the scene, called for medevac. Emma nodded slowly. 3 seconds. She set down her fork. Do you know how long I froze when the compound exploded at Hellgate? Jake hesitated. How long? 0, she said softly, because I'd already made peace with dying before I went in. Fear can't touch what's already dead. Her words sank into him like lead. Can you do that, Lieutenant? She asked. Can you make peace with death before you face it? He didn't answer, maybe couldn't. Think about it, she said, returning to her meal, because soon you'll have to. Jake nodded stiffly and left, the echo of her voice following him out into the cold. That night in her small quarters overlooking the desert, Emma opened her backpack. Inside were a handful of things: a worn photograph of 13 operators, a black tablet with secure access codes, and a small metal case. She opened the case and stared at the pills inside: nerve suppressants, high dose, $200 a piece. NASA-grade medication, developed for astronauts but repurposed for soldiers who'd seen too much. She dry-swallowed one and leaned back in the chair, closing her eyes as the memory flooded in. The flash, the sound, the 12 voices that went silent one by one. She promised them she'd finish the mission. She had. But the silence afterward had never ended. The door buzzed. Colonel Patterson stepped in. "Sorry to interrupt," he said quietly. "Just got word from the Pentagon. You were right. There's chatter, credible chatter, about a new facility. Nuclear material, terrorist hands, same pattern as Hellgate." Emma didn't open her eyes. "Then it begins. You want authorization to form the unit?" "No," she said. "I want permission to find them first." "Find who?" "The ones willing to die without hesitation." Outside, the desert wind howled through the training field, scattering sand like ashes. The floodlights cast long shadows, ghosts walking the perimeter, watching, waiting. Down in the barracks, Jake Morrison couldn't sleep. The image of Emma's tattoo burned behind his eyelids: Death Brigade, sole survivor. He sat up, the air heavy with guilt and something else, something like awe. At that same moment, Jessica Stone stared at her blank phone screen, whispering to no one, "I live-streamed a legend." She deleted the last file on her device and stared out the window. And in the control tower, Emma Hayes watched the night swallow Fort Thunder whole. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't proud. She was remembering 12 names, 12 stars, and wondering which of these bright young faces would become the next constellation. Because Death Brigade never truly died. It just waited for the world to forget, and for someone brave enough to call it back from the dark. The next morning broke like glass. Cold air, sharp light, silence. Fort Thunder's training ground looked different now. The same desert dust, the same heat, but beneath the stillness, something unseen lingered, the kind of tension that humbles men who thought they were unbreakable. The candidates stood in formation, waiting. No chatter, no swagger. Their laughter from yesterday had evaporated into the sand. Emma Hayes appeared from the east gate, uniform crisp, insignia visible now not as disguise but as declaration. A major, a veteran, a survivor. Every head turned. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She moved with precision, her steps measured, her expression unreadable. Only the faint tremor in her hand betrayed the toll of years, not weakness, but history. Behind her, Colonel Patterson and Master Sergeant Vulov followed in silence. The base's chain of command now stood behind the very woman they had once doubted. Emma stopped at the front of the formation, eyes scanning 30 soldiers who no longer dared look down at her. "Gentlemen," she began, voice calm but cutting through the air like a blade. "And ladies." The words echoed across the field, followed by the dry rasp of wind against metal. "This morning," she said, "you learned what happens when arrogance meets reality." No one moved. "You saw an old woman and made judgments about her strength, her worth, her right to stand beside you." She paused, letting the silence do the work. "Now you know what that uniform means, what it costs to wear it." She stepped closer, her gaze sweeping across the faces of those who'd laughed at her only hours ago. "In a normal training environment," she continued, "your behavior would earn a reprimand, maybe a demotion. But this—" She gestured around her, the desert, the base, the silence. "This isn't a normal environment." Her voice dropped to a near whisper, the kind that demanded attention. "You're here because someone thought you might be ready for something more, a kind of mission that never makes headlines, a mission that never comes home." The wind kicked up dust, carrying her words like echoes from another war. Death Brigade. The name hung in the air like a ghost. Some of the younger soldiers frowned, they didn't recognize it. Others stiffened, faces draining of color. Emma saw the confusion and addressed it head-on. The name doesn't exist in your training manuals. It doesn't appear on any roster. It's a unit that's been created and erased 14 times in the last 20 years. She glanced toward Vyulov. He stood motionless, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every time the world needed a miracle, she said, they sent us. A murmur rippled through the ranks. Most of those missions failed, she continued, because miracles are expensive, and we paid in blood. Her eyes softened, not in pity but memory. My team Death Brigade II went into Hellgate 5 years ago. 13 operators, 1 objective, 200 hostiles. We completed the mission, saved 3 cities, stopped what could have ended millions of lives. Her voice tightened. 12 didn't come home. The soldiers listened, silent, spellbound. Even the skeptics lowered their eyes. I was the one who did, she said simply, the sole survivor. No one dared speak. Emma walked slowly along the line of soldiers, studying their faces one by one. You want to know what Death Brigade really means? It means going into hell knowing you're not coming back. It means completing the mission even if your body never leaves the battlefield. It means erasing your name, your record, your existence for the sake of lives you'll never meet. Her hand lifted slightly, trembling, steadying against the weight of memory. You think courage is about charging into battle. It's not. It's about what you do after the fear arrives, when you realize no one's coming to save you, when the only way out is through. She stepped back, letting her words settle. Colonel Patterson moved forward. What Major Hayes is telling you is classified beyond top secret, he said. If any of you repeat what you've heard, you'll be buried under federal law. But if you stay, if you listen, you'll have a chance to become part of something that will never be spoken of, but will matter more than anything you've ever done. Emma turned back to the formation. You were chosen to be tested, not for strength, not for endurance, but for truth, for who you are when everything else falls away. Her gaze locked on Jake Morrison, the lieutenant whose arrogance had sparked it all. You, she said quietly, step forward. Jake hesitated, then obeyed. Tell me, Lieutenant, she said, why do you wear that uniform? The question caught him off guard. Ma'am, to serve, to protect my country. Good answer, Emma said. Now tell me the truth. He swallowed hard. Because I want to be the best, to prove something. Emma nodded. To who? Jake's eyes flicked to the others, then back. To myself, I guess. No, she said softly. To the world. You want to be seen. You want to be remembered. You think the uniform gives you that. He looked away. It doesn't, Emma said. This uniform doesn't make you worthy. It demands you prove it every day in silence when no one's watching. She turned to face the entire group. And that's what I'm here to find out. Which of you are wearing this for pride, and which of you are willing to wear it for sacrifice? The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, a voice spoke from the back, a young private with steady eyes. Ma'am, why tell us this? If Death Brigade is so secret, why reveal it at all? Emma regarded her. Because lies create cowards, and I don't train cowards. You deserve to know what you're volunteering for. She stepped aside and gestured to the screen behind her. An image appeared, 13 soldiers standing in front of a helicopter, faces blurred, weapons at ease. This was my team, she said. Death Brigade II. Her voice trembled only slightly as she touched the tablet, zooming in on each face, one by one. Staff Sergeant Marcus Jackson, sniper, could put a round through a playing card at 1,000 meters, died holding the east entrance so I could stabilize Williams. Sergeant First Class Luis Martinez, demolitions expert, used his body to shield the rest of us from a grenade. Corporal David Chen, communications specialist, kept contact with command until a sniper took him mid-sentence. Her eyes lingered on each image like a prayer. They weren't heroes because they died. They were heroes because they knew they would and went anyway. The image faded. The field went silent. "So now I'll ask you the same question," she said, scanning their faces. "Are you willing to die for something no one will ever know you did?" A long pause. No one moved. Then Jake Morrison raised his hand. "Ma'am," he said, "permission to speak." "Granted." He stepped forward again. "This morning I showed you arrogance, disrespect, weakness. You saw me at my worst. But if you're asking whether I'd go, the answer is yes." "Why?" she asked. Jake took a deep breath. "Because if what you're saying is true, if there's a threat that real, then someone has to stand between it and the people who don't even know it exists. Maybe this is how I make up for who I've been." Emma studied him for a long moment. "Step back, Lieutenant." He did. Then she turned to the rest. "Anyone who wishes to withdraw from this program can do so now. No shame, no record, no questions asked. Death Brigade is volunteer only." For a moment, no one moved. Then from the back of the formation, a woman stepped forward. Private Maria Santos, quiet, precise, the one who hadn't joined in the mocking the day before. "Ma'am," she said clearly, "I'm staying." One by one, others followed. Some out of conviction, some out of pride, some because they didn't yet understand what they were agreeing to. When the movement stopped, only 3 had stepped out. Emma's eyes moved over those who remained. "Then your real training begins tomorrow at 400. Bring everything you think you know about warfare and be ready to let it die." That night, the base was restless. In the barracks, some soldiers packed quietly, those who'd stepped out, their eyes heavy with guilt. Others lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if they'd just volunteered for something they wouldn't survive. In her quarters, Emma sat before her secure terminal. The glow of the screen reflected in her eyes as she entered her codes. The face that appeared on the encrypted feed belonged to General Patricia Morrison. "Go 7, the general said without preamble. "Report." "Initial assessment complete," Emma replied. 30 candidates observed, 27 remain. Of those, 5 show potential for Death Brigade parameters. The rest," she hesitated, "are followers, too dependent on structure. They'll break when it collapses." "Your recommendation?" "Run them through secondary assessment. I need to see how they act when they believe the mission is impossible, when they think no one's watching." The general nodded. "You have full autonomy, Emma. Are you sure about this, after Hellgate?" Emma's hand moved instinctively to her side, where 12 small star tattoos marked her fallen comrades. "Someone has to train them," she said quietly. "Someone who's already paid the price." The feed went dark. Emma sat back, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and the faint thump of distant footsteps outside. The desert stretched endless beyond the window, silent, merciless, alive. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. And by the time it was over, none of them, not even her, would be the same again. The desert was still black when the horn sounded. 400 hours. The air was cold enough to bite skin. Stars hung low, sharp and indifferent. The recruits stumbled from their bunks, eyes half open, muscles aching. They didn't speak, no one did. On the range, floodlights cut through the darkness. The ground shimmered with frost and dust, a contradiction only the desert could make. Emma Hayes was already there. Full gear, tactical vest, rifle slung across her back, her face unreadable. When the candidates arrived, she said nothing at first. She just stood at the edge of the platform, the silhouette of a soldier carved against the rising dawn. Then softly, "Scenario Alpha begins now." The sound of her voice was enough to wake them more than the horn had. A briefing screen flickered to life behind her. Maps, coordinates, satellite photos, a fake mission, but designed to feel real. Your objective, Emma said, her tone precise. High-value target in a fortified compound 15 kilometers north. You will infiltrate, locate, and extract the target to a designated safe house. You have 3 hours. She paused, scanning their faces. What you don't know, she continued, is that the intelligence is wrong. The numbers are wrong. The enemy's strength is wrong. The safe house is compromised. Everything that can go wrong will. A murmur rippled through the group. Jake Morrison raised a hand. Ma'am, are we running live ammo? Sim rounds, Emma said. But don't let that comfort you. The pain is real, so are the choices you'll have to make. Behind her, a line of armored transports rumbled to life. You'll go out in 5 teams of 6, she said. Call signs Alpha through Echo. Once you're out there, you're on your own. No radio contact. No rescue. This is Hellgate in miniature. Let's see what you do when the world collapses around you. She turned toward the colonel and nodded once. Send them. The transports tore across the desert, headlights slicing through dawn. Inside Alpha Team's vehicle, the air was thick with tension. Jake Morrison sat at the front, scanning the map while his second, Corporal Rodriguez, adjusted the comms. You think she's serious? Rodriguez muttered. Jake didn't look up. About which part? All of it, the no rescue, no support. Jake gave a bitter laugh. If you have to ask that, you haven't been paying attention. He didn't say it out loud, but the truth was gnawing at him. He hadn't been able to shake Emma's words from the night before. Can you make peace with death before you face it? The convoy halted at the ridge line. The teams disembarked, boots crunching on gravel. From the observation post 2 miles away, Emma watched through drone feeds, her voice calm as she gave last-minute orders to the monitoring crew. Remember, she said, I'm not measuring success. I'm measuring survival under collapse. The tech beside her hesitated. You mean failure? I mean truth, Emma said. Failure just happens to be where truth hides. Alpha Team was first to make contact. Alpha 6, eyes on compound, Jake reported over comms. 30+ hostiles visible, requesting permission to. The explosion cut him off. Their lead vehicle erupted in fire, smoke rising like a signal flare. In the observation post, Emma didn't flinch. IED simulation triggered, she said to the tech. Let's see what he does. On screen, Jake's biometrics spiked, heart rate, blood pressure, cortisol. Alpha 6, this is Alpha 1, Jake called. We have casualties. Rodriguez and Thompson down, continuing mission. Emma made a note. Good, he pushes forward, but does he abandon the wounded? The answer came seconds later. Jake crouched beside the simulated casualties, issuing rapid orders. 2 soldiers stayed behind to stabilize the wounded while the others advanced. Interesting, Emma murmured. Compassion balanced with control, not reckless yet. Across the range, Bravo Team, led by Jessica Stone, took a different approach. They reached visual contact and froze. Too many hostiles, too little cover. Jessica called for a halt, trying to assess. Her instincts told her to wait to find a smarter path. But the clock kept ticking, and hesitation began to look a lot like fear. Emma started a timer on the console. Let's see how long she waits, she said softly. Sometimes doing nothing costs more lives than doing the wrong thing. Minutes turned into half an hour. The delay would prove fatal for the mission and for her team. By sunrise, the temperature had climbed above 100 degrees F. The simulation grew chaotic. Charlie Team, led by instructor Mike Davis, located the asset first, a real veteran playing the role of a wounded informant. His prosthetic leg and slow pace turned every step into a liability. Can't move fast enough, Davis said, frustration cutting through the static. Requesting evac. No evac, came Emma's voice from command. You have what you have. In the control room, she leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Now let's see what loyalty costs him. Davis's team argued over whether to leave the asset or stay together. Their indecision turned deadly. A simulated ambush wiped out half the squad. Emma said nothing. She just marked the result. Hesitation equals death. By 700, every team was engaged in chaos. The training compound was alive with the sound of mock gunfire and shouted orders. Drones captured footage from above, smoke, confusion, soldiers running through dust like shadows. Emma moved from monitor to monitor, expression unreadable. She saw pride give way to panic, plans dissolve into improvisation. This wasn't about tactics anymore. It was about endurance of spirit. And then something unexpected happened. Delta team, led by quiet, unassuming Maria Santos, changed the game. She assessed the same impossible situation as everyone else. Overwhelming enemy force, compromised intelligence, wounded target. But instead of retreating or charging ahead, she split her squad. 2 volunteers went one direction, drawing fire, creating chaos. The rest infiltrated from the opposite flank, moving through drainage ditches toward the compound. Emma leaned forward. "She's sacrificing them," she whispered. Viktor Vyulov, watching beside her, frowned. "Calculated loss." "Yes," Emma said softly. "A commander who understands the price before she pays it." Minutes later, artillery simulations rained down over Delta's position. Maria's team huddled in a drainage culvert with the asset, radioing for danger close fire on their own coordinates. In the observation post, Emma picked up the comms headset. "Delta 6, confirm your call for fire." Maria's voice came back through static, calm, precise, unshaken. "Control Delta 6, confirm danger close, asset secure, hostiles concentrated on us, request immediate suppression." Emma closed her eyes briefly. That was exactly what she had done at Hellgate. "Confirmed," she said quietly. The simulated artillery struck. Smoke filled the screens. When it cleared, Maria's team was battered, 2 dead, 1 wounded, but the asset survived. Emma exhaled. She understands. By 8:30, it was over. Of the 5 teams, 4 had failed. Alpha and Delta were the only ones to complete the objective, even then at brutal cost. The others returned in silence, faces streaked with dust and sweat. They weren't laughing now. They weren't soldiers in training anymore. They were people who'd glimpsed the edge, even if it was simulated. The debrief took place in the hangar. Emma stood before them, arms folded, eyes sharp. Behind her, screens replayed the footage, each team's choices, mistakes, and moments of truth. "Let's talk about what happened," she said. Her tone wasn't angry. It was worse, disappointed. "Alpha Team," she began. "You continued the mission despite casualties. Good. You left a security element with the wounded. Better. But you failed to anticipate secondary IEDs. You assumed your enemy would behave predictably. He won't." Jake nodded grimly. "Yes, ma'am." "Bravo Team," she continued, turning to Jessica Stone. "You hesitated. You waited for the perfect opportunity. In war, that's a myth. You don't wait for clarity, you create it. The cost of your hesitation was your entire squad." Jessica looked like she might break. Her voice trembled. "Yes, ma'am." Emma didn't soften. Courage isn't fearlessness, Private. It's movement despite it. She turned next to Maria Santos. "Delta Team," she said. "You sacrificed 2 soldiers to complete the mission. Explain your reasoning." Maria stood straight, chin high. "Ma'am, it was arithmetic. 2 casualties to save 3 plus the asset. They volunteered. They knew what it meant." "And if those 2 were your friends?" Maria hesitated only a second. "Then I'd honor their choice, ma'am, because their deaths would mean something." Emma nodded slowly. "That's what separates you from the rest." The room was silent. The air itself seemed to listen. Finally, Emma stepped back, her eyes moving over them all. "What you faced today wasn't a test of tactics," she said. "It was a test of truth. who you are when everything goes wrong, who you become when the mission no longer cares if you live or die. She pointed toward the screens, where Hellgate footage, grainy, distorted, showed 13 soldiers moving through fire. I've lived that truth. I've watched men and women make choices that haunt me every night. You're here because I need to know who among you can face that without breaking. She let the silence stretch, then said, "Tomorrow we begin individual evaluations. No teams, no safety net. Each of you will face a scenario built around your greatest weakness. You won't know it until it hits you. And when it does, remember this: failure doesn't happen when you lose. It happens when you stop." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Tonight," she said softly, "you have one assignment. Write a letter to someone who matters to you. Don't explain, don't justify, just say goodbye in case you never get another chance." Her voice softened, almost human. "If you can't do that, you're not ready for what comes next." That night, Fort Thunder was a different place. The barracks glowed dimly under the moonlight. Inside, soldiers stared at blank sheets of paper. Jake Morrison sat at his desk, pen hovering over the page. His hands shook not from fear, but from the weight of what he needed to say. How do you tell your mother you might not come back without telling her why? Across the hall, Jessica Stone had tried 6 times to start her letter. Each draft ended the same way, crumpled, wet with tears. Maria Santos wrote with steady hands. Her letter wasn't goodbye. It was gratitude. Her father would understand even if it destroyed him. Outside, Emma walked the perimeter in silence. Through open windows she saw them, each one fighting their private war on paper. She didn't knock, didn't interrupt. Because this, she knew, was the real test. Not surviving bullets or bombs, but making peace with the life you were about to leave behind. The morning came gray and still, like the world was holding its breath. No drills, no horns, no orders shouted across the range. Instead, 30 names glowed on a screen in the command center, each one marked for an individual evaluation. Emma Hayes stood alone before it, a black coffee cooling in her hand. She hadn't slept. The night had been filled with voices, old ones, the kind that only spoke when the world went quiet. Viktor Vyulov entered quietly. "You really think this is necessary?" Emma didn't turn. "They're asking to join something they don't understand. It's my job to make them understand before it kills them." He studied her profile, the hollow beneath her eyes. "And what about you? What about me? You've been fighting ghosts for 5 years, Emma. Maybe this is just another battlefield that doesn't exist anymore." She finally looked at him. "Oh, it exists. It just doesn't care if you believe in it." By 600, the evaluations began. Each candidate was called alone into the chamber, a repurposed storage hangar turned psychological gauntlet. No drills, no physical endurance tests, just simulation pods, sensors, and one screen. Behind the glass, Emma watched. Her face remained unreadable, but her hands, clasped behind her back, trembled slightly. Jake Morrison was first. He stood inside the chamber, visor down, rifle slung tight. The simulation began. An urban combat zone, smoke, gunfire, civilians scattering. Through the speakers, Emma's voice came calm and detached. Mission objective: retrieve the asset. Secondary objective: minimize civilian casualties. Jake nodded, moving tactically through the simulated street. It started clean until the smoke cleared. 2 hostiles, 2 civilians. Both sides tangled, shouting chaos. Jake's training kicked in muzzle flash-controlled bursts, but one shot went wide. A civilian dropped. He froze just like before. Emma whispered, 3 seconds, same as your first deployment. Jake spun, scanning for threats that weren't real anymore. The simulation pulsed red, mission failure. In program, Emma said. He ripped off the visor, sweat dripping down his face. That was rigged. No, she said quietly, that was truth. She stepped closer to the glass. You can't lead others if you can't forgive yourself. Every mission you run will end the same way until you stop chasing redemption through perfection. Jake didn't answer. He just stood there hollowed out, realizing she'd seen straight through him. Next came Jessica Stone. Her scenario was different, no combat. Just a single task, protect a wounded comrade until evac. At first she did everything right. Applied pressure to the wound, radioed for extraction, scanned the perimeter. Then the simulation introduced the voice. Her own mother's voice, panicked, crying for help from another room. She hesitated, looked toward the sound. The comrade's vitals dropped. Emma watched her heart rate spike, her breathing falter. She split, she murmured, duty versus love. Jessica ran toward the sound, burst through the door. Empty room, just static. When she turned back, the wounded soldier on screen was gone. Mission failed. Jessica tore off the visor, tears streaking her face. That's not fair. Emma's expression softened just a little. Neither is war. You think the enemy cares what's fair when they use your compassion against you. Jessica's lip trembled. I couldn't just ignore. I know, Emma said quietly. That's why it hurts, because you're still human. Maria Santos entered next. Her simulation was set in a ruined village, foreign language chatter echoing in the distance. She moved like a ghost, calm, calculating, efficient. Then she found it, a group of hostiles holding civilians hostage. The only way to complete the mission was to call in air support. But the strike zone would kill everyone inside, including the hostages. Emma's voice came through. What's your call, Sergeant? Maria froze. Collateral damage. 70%, Emma said. Maria swallowed. And if I don't strike? The hostiles will detonate a suicide charge. All civilians will die. You'll lose the objective. For 30 seconds, Maria didn't breathe. Her eyes darted across the feed, mothers, children, the armed men shouting. Then quietly she whispered, fire. The blast filled the screen. When the smoke cleared, no one was left. Maria dropped her weapon, tears streaming silently. Emma watched her vitals drop, pulse low, oxygen steady, calm but broken. End program, she said. When Maria stepped out, Emma was waiting. Why? Emma asked. Because saving half measures nothing when all will die, Maria said softly. Emma studied her. That's not logic talking, that's grief. Maria looked up. You would have done the same. For the first time, Emma hesitated. Yes, she said quietly, and that's what I live with. By noon, the chamber had seen 20 soldiers, 20 failures, 20 versions of truth laid bare. Each one walked out shaken, some silent, some defiant, some broken. The ones who talked too much before now said nothing. The ones who laughed loudest now avoided mirrors. Emma stood at the observation window long after the last test ended, the screen flickering through the recorded footage. Mistakes, fear, grief, humanity. Victor entered, setting a folder on the desk. Results, he said. 4 candidates passed, barely. Emma didn't open it. They all passed. Vyulov frowned. You're redefining the metric again. I'm redefining what survival looks like, she said. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to keep moving after the soul breaks. Later that evening, Emma walked alone through the empty training ground. The sand shimmered under the sun, a mirror of the world she used to know. Her shadow stretched long, thin, fractured. In her head, she heard their voices again, her old team. Jackson Chen Martinez. You taught them our pain, a voice whispered. No, she thought, I'm teaching them how to live with it. She stopped near the perimeter fence, the same place she'd stood 5 years earlier before Hellgate. The wind carried the same dry taste of dust and memory. She pulled a small recorder from her pocket, the same model she used during the Hellgate mission. Her thumb hovered over the button, trembling. Mission log, she whispered. Day 1, selection phase. Psychological evaluation complete. Candidates exposed to trauma-based simulations with adaptive moral conflict parameters. Initial reactions confirm human integrity remains the weakest and strongest link. She hesitated, voice cracking slightly. Observation. Fear and compassion are indistinguishable in their first heartbeat. What determines a soldier's soul is what comes after. She clicked it off. That night the recruits gathered in the mess hall not for food but for silence. They didn't talk about the simulations. They didn't need to. Jake sat with Jessica and Maria at the far end. No hierarchy now, just shared exhaustion. Jake finally broke the silence. She's trying to break us. Maria shook her head. No, she's trying to see who already is. Jessica looked up, her eyes red. Did you kill them? Maria didn't answer right away. In the simulation, yes, but in my head, they're still there. The three sat in silence. Somewhere a generator hummed. Outside, the wind whistled through steel and sand. After a while, Jake spoke again. You think we're ready for whatever this Death Brigade is? Maria gave a small, tired smile. I don't think anyone's ever ready, not even her. In her quarters, Emma stared at the photograph of her old unit again. 12 faces frozen in the one moment before everything went wrong. She traced the outline of each one with her fingertip. Her voice barely audible. You'd hate me for this, for putting them through the same pain, but you'd understand why. Her hand shook. She gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. I thought dying was the hardest part, she whispered. Turns out it's living with who survived. The door buzzed softly. Jake Morrison stood outside, his uniform dusty, eyes dark from lack of sleep. Ma'am, I know it's late, but can I ask something? She nodded for him to enter. He stepped in slowly. When you talk about Hellgate, you sound like you're still there. Emma looked at him, really looked. Young, scarred, desperate to understand. Because part of me is, she said. Every mission leaves a piece behind. You just have to learn how to walk without it. Jake hesitated. What did it feel like when it ended? Her eyes went distant, like silence, the kind that doesn't stop when the shooting does. That's the real battlefield, Lieutenant, not the one outside, the one inside. He nodded slowly. Then why do it again? Emma's lips pressed into a line. Because silence is worse when you know others will face it alone. She looked back at the window, the desert glowing faintly under the moon. Get some sleep, Jake. Tomorrow we start building the unit. Death Brigade doesn't wait for permission. He saluted quietly and left. When the door closed, Emma finally allowed herself to exhale. Her reflection in the window stared back, tired, scarred, but alive. For now. That night the wind picked up again. Sand whipped across the base, like memory refusing to stay buried. Inside her quarters, the photo of her old team fell from the desk. It landed face up, the cracked frame catching the light. 13 soldiers stared up at her from the past. She stared back, whispering to them, I won't let you die twice. By the third morning, the air around Fort Thunder felt heavier, like the desert itself had started holding secrets. The candidates no longer walked in groups. They moved alone, silent, cautious, as if each footstep could betray something they hadn't yet earned. Emma Hayes stood on the observation deck, scanning them one by one. Their movements, their postures, their eyes. In those details she saw everything. Who had learned from pain? Who was only pretending? Who might actually survive? Victor Vulov joined her, setting down a mug of black coffee. You're building ghosts again, he said quietly. Emma didn't answer. He studied her face, the exhaustion that discipline couldn't hide. Command been calling all morning. They're asking for progress reports. I'm not ready to give them one. They're not asking, Emma. She turned finally, eyes colder than the dawn. Then tell them what they always hear, that we're close, that results are promising, that hope is alive. Vyulov gave a dry laugh. And what if they ask how many of them will make it? Emma looked back out at the desert. Tell them none. The selection process entered its final stage. Emma had narrowed it down to 12 candidates. The number wasn't accidental. 12. The same number she'd lost at Hellgate. Jake Morrison, Maria Santos, Jessica Stone, and 9 others who had survived every test not because they were fearless, but because they'd learned to keep moving through fear. Each carried scars from the simulations, not visible but real, the kind that sat behind their eyes. In the hangar, Emma stood before them. You've endured physical exhaustion, psychological warfare, moral collapse, she said. What comes next isn't about strength, it's about choice. She gestured to the table in front of her, 12 folders sealed. Inside each folder, she continued, is a profile, a mission file. Each of you will take one. Each file represents a life, a real person under threat somewhere in the world. The name, the coordinates, the circumstances, all accurate. You will study it for 24 hours. Then you'll tell me who deserves to be saved and who doesn't. Jessica frowned. Ma'am, that's unfair, Emma said. It's supposed to be. She stepped closer. This is where soldiers stop being soldiers, where decisions stop being clean. You want to lead. Learn to choose who dies so others can live. No one spoke. The silence was thick with discomfort. Take your folders, she said, and remember there are no right answers, only consequences. That night, Fort Thunder didn't sleep. Each recruit sat alone under the humming lights, reading the lives inside those files. Jake's folder contained a diplomat's daughter trapped in a hostile border town. Extraction could trigger international fallout. Jessica's was a child soldier responsible for dozens of deaths, only 16 years old. Maria's was a captured intelligence officer being used as leverage. Rescue might expose deep-cover assets worldwide. They read, they debated silently with themselves. Some prayed. In the command office, Emma watched them through surveillance feeds, not as an invader, but as someone searching for reflection. Vyulov sat across from her, arms crossed. This isn't evaluation, he said. It's cruelty. It's preparation, Emma replied. Because one day they'll have to choose between a life and a mission, between mercy and math. Vyulov sighed. You think that justifies the nightmares you're giving them? Emma's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. No, but it might help them survive theirs. By morning, they assembled again. Each one carried their file like a confession. Emma waited until they were all there before speaking. You've read the lives, you've done the math, now decide. Jake stepped forward first. The diplomat's daughter, he said. If we don't extract her, it could destabilize the entire region. Thousands of civilians could die. I'd risk the mission. Emma nodded once. Utilitarian logic, safe, predictable. Jessica was next. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. The boy soldier, I'd try to bring him in alive. He didn't choose his war. Maybe he can still be saved. Emma studied her. Mercy disguised as hope, dangerous. Jessica swallowed. I know, but I couldn't kill a child even if it meant the mission failed. Emma said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, that's why you might still have a soul when the rest don't. Maria Santos stepped forward. Her tone was level, her eyes sharp. The captured officer, I'd leave him. If we save him, we burn 3 embedded networks and compromise hundreds of lives, one against many. Emma's gaze didn't waver. You'd make that call easily. Maria hesitated. Not easily, but I'd live with it. Emma's jaw tightened. No one lives with it, Sergeant. We just carry it better than others. By the end of the hour, 12 lives had been debated, defended, sacrificed in words. Emma closed the files, stacking them neatly. Good, she said. You've just made your first command decisions. The difference is these weren't simulations. The room fell silent. Jake frowned. You mean these were real people, Emma said. Real intel. Their lives depended on decisions made in this room. Shock rippled through them. Jessica's voice broke. What happens now? Emma looked at her. Now we see if your choices were right. That afternoon, Emma received the encrypted transmission she'd been expecting, an angry face on a secure screen. General Patricia Morrison. Emma, the general said, you went too far. Emma didn't blink. I went where command refuses to. Those files were active operations, Morrison snapped. You compromised intelligence. No, Emma said evenly. I tested empathy. I needed to know if any of them were still capable of it. Empathy doesn't win wars. It's the only thing that makes them worth fighting. Morrison's expression softened, if only slightly. You're playing God again, Emma. Haven't we learned what happens when you do that? Emma's voice lowered. At Hellgate, I didn't play God. I watched him look away. The general's silence was the only answer. Then she said quietly, you have 48 hours. Headquarters is reviewing your command authority. If they pull the plug, the Death Brigade dies with you. The screen went dark. Emma stood there, hands shaking, breath ragged. Victor stepped in moments later, reading her face. They're shutting you down. Maybe, she said, but not before we finish. He sighed. You're not saving them, Emma. You're making them like you. She turned to him. That's the point. Someone has to carry what we couldn't bury. That night, the desert wind howled across the compound. Sand hissed against steel and glass like whispers from the past. In the barracks, the recruits sat in uneasy silence. The weight of what they'd learned, what they'd chosen, pressed down on them like armor. Jessica finally spoke. She used us. Jake shook his head. She tested us. Maria's voice was soft but sharp. And now we know what we're capable of and what we'll never forget. They fell quiet again, listening to the wind. In her quarters, Emma poured herself a drink, not whiskey, just water. Her hand trembled as she lifted it. She stared out the window at the lights flickering across Fort Thunder. Each one represented a life she'd broken to rebuild. The door opened quietly behind her. Vyulov stepped in without speaking, holding a small envelope. What's that? She asked. Courier from command, he said. Classified orders. She took it, slid it open with a knife, and unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned it once, twice, then she sat down slowly. They're deploying us, she whispered. Vyulov blinked. Deploying already. New threat, she said. Confirmed intel. Unnamed insurgent group. Biochemical weapon in transit. They want us to intercept before it crosses the border. He stared at her. You haven't even finished training them. Emma's voice was quiet but resolute. Then the field will finish what I can't. At dawn, she gathered the 12 in the hangar. None of them looked rested. They didn't know what was coming, but they knew it wasn't more simulations. Emma stood before them, gear already on. The rising sun painted her face in light and shadow. Orders came in last night, she said. Real mission, high risk, high value, no recognition if we succeed, no rescue if we fail. Jake frowned. Ma'am, are we even cleared? Emma met his gaze. You're cleared because I say you are. Jessica's voice shook. This isn't training anymore, is it? No, Emma said. This is the part where we prove we were meant to wear this uniform. She looked over them one last time, 12 faces, each a reflection of who she used to be. Make no mistake, she said softly. We're not heroes. We're just the ones who show up when everyone else looks away. Maria asked quietly, what's the mission called? Emma zipped her vest, eyes distant. They're calling it Operation in Berlin. Is that official? She shook her head. No, it's what I'm calling it, because when this ends, the world will see the smoke but not the fire that made it. That night, as they prepped for deployment, Vyulov stood watching from the runway. Emma approached. her silhouette framed by the roaring lights of the cargo plane. He said quietly, "They won't forgive you for this." Emma adjusted her gear. "I'm not asking them to." He nodded slowly, "Then promise me one thing." She looked up. "When you go back into hell this time," he said, "make sure you don't leave yourself behind again." Emma almost smiled. "There's not much left to leave." Then she turned toward the ramp, climbing into the aircraft with the 12 she'd chosen. The engines roared to life, and the desert night filled with wind and purpose. Fort Thunder watched as the plane lifted off, a streak of metal and defiance disappearing into the stars. Somewhere below, the wind whispered through the empty training grounds, carrying the last words she'd left carved into the sand before they departed. "Sometimes salvation wears no flag." The desert had no mercy. By the time the C-130 cleared Fort Thunder's airspace, silence replaced the roar of the engines. Inside, the 12 sat strapped in, faces pale under red cabin lights, gear secured, weapons checked, hearts uncertain. Emma Hayes stood near the cockpit, headset on, eyes fixed on the tactical screen. The target zone flickered, a valley near the border, coordinates burned into memory. Operation in Berlin. Objective: intercept biochemical transport. Reality: no one outside this aircraft even knew they were coming. Colonel Patterson's voice crackled through the secure comms. "Major Hayes, this op isn't sanctioned. If anything goes wrong..." Emma cut the line. "Everything always goes wrong." They dropped under night cover, fast-roping into a canyon lit only by starlight and dust. The heat from the aircraft washed over them as it pulled away, leaving nothing but sand, silence, and their own breathing. Jake Morrison secured the perimeter, all teams down and accounted for, moving on foot. Emma nodded. "We're ghosts from this point. No lights, no radios unless I say so." The squad advanced through the valley, moving in tight formation. The wind carried a strange scent, metal and rot. Jessica whispered, "What is that?" "Death," Maria said quietly, "old and waiting." They reached the ridge overlooking the compound, a cluster of structures surrounded by floodlights and rusting vehicles. Through her binoculars, Emma counted 30 hostiles, more than intel suggested, always more. She muttered, "Hellgate déjà vu." Jake crouched beside her. "Orders." "Two flanks," Emma said. "Alpha Team, you, Jessica Lopez, take the west entrance. Delta Team with me from the east. Quiet until it's not." He nodded. "Rules of engagement." "None," she said. "If they're guarding that cargo, they're already dead." They moved like shadows. Dust clung to their boots, hearts pounded under silence. At 50 meters, the first guard fell, a single suppressed round from Emma's rifle, precision like breathing. Inside the compound, the air was thick with smoke and chemicals. Blue drums lined the walls, each marked with a faded biohazard symbol. Jessica whispered, "Ma'am, what if the intel's wrong again?" "It's always wrong," Emma replied. "That's why we're here." She signaled hand gestures, advance, clear, hold. The squad flowed like a single organism, each motion silent, practiced, terrified. Then a sound cut through the night, a child's cry. They froze. Emma turned sharply toward the source, a small room at the far end. She kicked the door open. Inside, a boy no older than 10 sat tied to a chair, eyes wide, terrified. Jake lowered his weapon. "He's just a kid." Jessica moved forward, voice trembling. "Who would?" Before she could finish, Emma grabbed her shoulder. "Stop." She pointed. A thin wire glinted beneath the boy's feet, running to the wall. "Booby trap." Emma's stomach sank. "They're using him as bait." Jake swore under his breath. "Jesus Christ." Emma crouched beside the boy. "Hey," she whispered, "don't move, I'm going to get you out." Her hands moved slow, steady, tracing the wire to its source. The trigger connected to a pressure plate. She slid a blade beneath the mechanism, exhaled and cut. Click. The world went white. Explosion. Screams. Fire. The blast threw her backward, slamming her against the wall. Ears ringing, lungs burning, sand and dust raining down. Emma, Jake's voice cut through static. She rolled, coughing, vision fractured by smoke. The room was on fire. The boy was gone. She could barely breathe. Report, she shouted, grabbing her radio. Static, then Maria's voice. We're taking fire, east wall compromised. They were waiting for us. Ambush. Emma staggered to her feet, rifle raised. Fall back to Point Delta, regroup. Jake's voice. Negative, we're cut off. 2 down, Jessica's hit. Emma's mind snapped back to Hellgate. The same chaos, the same betrayal, the same silence where backup should have been. She forced her body forward through the smoke. Hold your ground, I'm coming. She burst into the open courtyard, tracer rounds cutting through the air like lightning. Her squad was pinned behind crates, returning fire in desperate bursts. Emma dove behind cover beside Jake. Status. Jessica's bleeding bad, he said. Through and through, lower abdomen. Emma checked the wound, bad but survivable. She ripped open a med pack, pressed gauze, tied a tourniquet. Jessica gasped. They knew we were coming. Emma's eyes darkened. Someone sold us out. Maria's voice crackled through comms. We've got movement on the ridge, unknown vehicles inbound. How many? Too many. The ridge exploded in light, headlights, gunfire, engines roaring. Jake fired suppressive bursts while Emma scanned for an escape route. None. They were surrounded. Fall back, she shouted. South tunnel. They moved under fire, dragging Jessica between them. Bullets tore through walls and sand. The night burned with chaos. Emma's head rang with echoes of the past. 13 went in. 1 came out. Not again. Not this time. They reached the tunnel entrance, half collapsed, barely wide enough to crawl. Go, she ordered. Get her through. Jake hesitated. What about you? I'll hold them off. He shook his head. We're not leaving you. Emma grabbed his vest, eyes burning. That's an order, Lieutenant. He hesitated, then nodded, the kind of nod soldiers give when they already know the cost. He dragged Jessica through. Maria followed. One by one, the squad disappeared into the dark. Emma turned back toward the open night. Her rifle rose, her breathing slowed. The first enemy appeared through smoke, then another and another. She moved like a ghost. Controlled bursts. Single kills. Precision born of pain. But the numbers never stopped coming. Inside the tunnel, Jake's voice echoed through the dark. We have to go back for her. Maria's tone was steel. If we do, we die, she knew that. Jessica's voice was faint. She'll make it. Jake gritted his teeth, eyes glistening. She better. Outside, Emma fought until her rifle clicked empty. She reached for her sidearm, empty, knife gone. Only silence and the smell of smoke. The attackers closed in. Emma's breathing slowed. She looked up, the night sky fractured by firelight. Hellgate all over again. Then headlights cut across the compound. A vehicle barreled through the gate, gunner on top, firing heavy rounds that tore through the attackers. The jeep screeched to a halt beside her. Vilov leaned out from the passenger seat, shouting, "Get in." Emma stumbled forward, blood streaking her face. How? No time. She climbed in, and they tore out of the compound, fire and bullets chasing them into the night. Behind them, the sky burned orange. Operation in Berlin had gone to hell. 2 hours later, in a safe house beyond the ridge, Emma stood at the window, body shaking. Her squad lay scattered around the room, exhausted, wounded, silent. Jessica pale but alive. Vilov poured her water. You need a medic. She didn't take it. How did you find us? Intercepted chatter, he said. They leaked your op. Someone at command wanted you dead. Emma's jaw clenched. Of course they did. He hesitated. They knew you'd defy orders, and Berline was bait to bury Death Brigade before it began. She turned slowly toward him, and instead they woke it. The next morning, Emma walked outside into the cold dawn. The air was silent, too silent. Jake joined her, arm in a sling. You should have let me stay back there. She looked at him, tired but alive. You wouldn't have made it. Neither should you. A faint smile ghosted across her lips. Story of my life. They stood in silence, watching the smoke on the horizon, the remains of Berline still burning. Jake finally asked, so what now? Emma's voice was quiet, steady. Now we go dark. Command betrayed us. That means we're free. He frowned. Free to do what? She turned toward the sunrise, eyes cold with purpose. Finish the mission they tried to erase. Back inside, Maria cleaned her weapon in silence. Jessica slept nearby, pale but breathing steady. Vilov approached, lowering his voice. You can't keep this up, Emma. You're bleeding, not just physically. Emma didn't answer. She looked at the wall where a dusty mirror hung. For a moment she saw her reflection, and behind it, 12 ghosts from Hellgate. Then she whispered, they took my team once. They won't take this one. Vilov sighed. And if the price is your life again? Emma's eyes hardened. Then maybe this time I'll finally earn the peace they never got. Outside, the desert wind picked up again, carrying with it the ashes of both Hellgate and Berline. 2 missions, 2 failures, 1 survivor who refused to stop. Somewhere behind her, Jake's voice echoed, half whisper, half prayer. She's not fighting wars anymore. She's fighting ghosts. Maria's reply came soft, certain. No, she's fighting so the rest of us won't become them. Dawn came slow. Gray light slid over the valley, touching ash in silence. Emma Hayes sat on the tailgate of the transport truck, boots coated in dust, rifle across her knees. The others slept inside the safe house, exhausted, broken, alive. She watched the horizon until the sun burned through the haze. Each morning felt the same, another day she wasn't supposed to see. The comms unit beside her buzzed once, then crackled to life. General Morrison's voice, sharp, cold, layered with restrained fury. Major Hayes, you've gone completely off protocol. You led an unauthorized strike, incurred casualties, destroyed evidence, and compromised a black-level operation. Emma didn't move. You were bait, Emma, the general continued. That mission was designed to test a leak inside command. You were never supposed to engage. Emma's grip tightened around the rifle. You used us. We used data, Morrison said flatly, not people. The words landed like shrapnel. Emma took a slow breath. I lost soldiers for your experiment. Collateral consequences, Morrison replied. Stand down, return the unit. This operation and this brigade are over. The line went dead. For a moment there was only wind. Then Emma whispered. No, General, not over, just beginning. She entered the safe house. Jake, Maria, and Jessica were awake, their faces drawn, eyes hollow. Command wants us home, Emma said. Jake's jaw tensed. Home after this. Maria's voice was low. You mean after they set us up to die? Emma nodded. They call it containment, I call it betrayal. Jessica looked at her, fear and faith battling in her eyes. So what do we do now? Emma set her rifle down gently. We do what soldiers were never trained for, the right thing. They spent the next 6 hours combing the compound's wreckage. Among the debris, they found what Emma suspected, evidence of the biochemical weapon command had denied existed. Steel canisters, fractured but intact, stamped with corporate logos, American ones. Maria whispered they were manufacturing it. Jake stared at the markings, our own people. Emma's chest tightened, Hellgate all over again. She remembered the reports they'd been told to burn, the civilians written off as enemy casualties, the cover-up that erased her team. She'd sworn she'd never bury the truth again. By dusk, the Death Brigade, what remained of it, moved out. They didn't travel in formation or speak in radio code. They were past that. They rode through the desert in silence, following the wind like ghosts heading home. At nightfall, they reached the old airstrip near the border, abandoned, forgotten. Vyulov waited there with a single aircraft, its engines idling like a restless heart. "You're late," he said, but his tone carried relief. Emma held out the metal case containing the recovered vials. Proof. Vyulov opened it, his breath catching. "You realize what this means?" "Yes," Emma said. "It means they'll erase us to keep this quiet." He looked at her for a long moment. "And you're going back anyway." "I started this, I end it." Jake stepped forward, "Not alone." Emma shook her head. "This isn't a mission anymore, Lieutenant. It's testimony, and someone has to make sure it gets through." She turned to Maria. "You're pilot qualified. You'll fly them out once I'm inside." Maria's brow furrowed. "You're not coming." Emma smiled faintly. "I'm done running from ghosts." Hours later, the aircraft lifted off, carrying Jake, Maria, and Jessica toward neutral airspace and toward life. Emma and Vyulov watched it vanish into the night, then climbed into a battered jeep heading toward the capital. Vyulov broke the silence. "You realize they'll arrest you." Emma's eyes stayed on the road. "If that's what it takes." He nodded slowly. "Then let me drive." By the time they reached command headquarters, Dawn had returned, pale, uncertain, familiar. Emma stepped out of the jeep in full uniform. The guards froze when they saw her, the woman who wasn't supposed to exist. "Major Emma Hayes," she said calmly, "reporting final debrief for Operation in Berlin." The guards exchanged glances, then opened the doors. Inside, the corridors were sterile, quiet, haunted by fluorescent light. She walked straight to the operations wing, Vyulov following a step behind. They entered the briefing hall. General Morrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by senior officers. The room fell silent. Emma placed the case on the table and opened it. The vials gleamed under the lights. "Your experiment failed, General," she said, "but the truth didn't." Morrison's eyes darkened. "You have no authority to." "You used my team as bait," Emma interrupted. "You let 12 soldiers walk into a kill zone to prove a theory, and you told me Hellgate was a one-time mistake." Her voice shook, but not from fear, from control. "This," she said, pointing to the canisters, "isn't an enemy weapon. It's ours. Manufactured, tested, deployed, all under your command." One of the officers started to rise. "That's classified." Emma's glare stopped him cold. "No, that's murder." Vyulov stepped forward, setting a flash drive on the table. "Backup data, satellite images, transmission logs. We copied everything before extraction." The generals exchanged glances, panic replacing arrogance. Morrison leaned back slowly. "You realize, Major, this will destroy everything you've ever served." Emma met her eyes. "Then maybe it's time something burned." Silence filled the room. Morrison studied her, the scars, the weariness, the unwavering steadiness. "You won't survive this, Emma." Emma's voice softened. "I wasn't supposed to survive the last one either." By the end of that day, the file on Operation in Berlin went dark. Command initiated containment procedures, communications blackouts, legal threats. But the truth had already escaped. Leaked to the press, transmitted through anonymous channels. Somewhere, footage of the compound played on civilian news networks. Images of soldiers without insignia pulling survivors from fire. They didn't know her name. They didn't have to. Weeks later, in a quiet rehabilitation wing outside Phoenix, a nurse adjusted a blanket over the woman in the corner bed. Emma Hayes lay still, one arm in a sling, eyes half open but unfocused. The explosion had taken more from her than she'd admitted. Jake visited every evening. He never came in uniform, just jeans and silence. Sometimes he brought books, sometimes he brought nothing. One night he found her awake. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured. "Neither should you," he said. A faint smile touched her lips. "You got them home." He nodded. "Maria's training new recruits, Jessica's back in school. The others, they're figuring out how to live again." "Good," Emma whispered. "That's all I wanted." Jake hesitated. "They're calling you a traitor, ma'am, officially." "Good," she said again. "That means they're scared." He looked down. "You'd do it again, wouldn't you?" Her eyes met his, tired, sharp, alive. "Every time." He swallowed hard. "They said you're being discharged, full retirement." Emma nodded slowly. "They ordered me to remove the uniform." Jake's throat tightened, and she turned her gaze to the window, where the desert light spilled across the floor, warm, endless. "And I did," she said softly, "but they couldn't take what's beneath it." Months later, the base formerly known as Fort Thunder was decommissioned. No ceremonies, no headlines, just silence. But if you walked far enough into the desert, past the fences and the wind-carved stones, you'd find something carved into a piece of metal left half buried in the sand. 13 names. 12 from Hellgate. One new. At the bottom, etched in small, uneven letters. Death Brigade lives. One evening, years later, Maria Santos stood at that very spot, wind whipping through her hair, the last light of sunset touching the inscription. Beside her, Jake placed a small flag in the sand, not for country, for memory. Jessica stood a few steps back, tears tracing the same lines Dust once had. None of them spoke, they didn't need to. Because in the end, silence was the only language Emma ever taught them, silence filled with purpose. Far from them, in a small town outside Tucson, a woman walked into a diner just before closing. Older, gray at the temples, a faint limp. The waitress smiled. "Coffee." The woman nodded. "Black, no sugar." When the cup arrived, she stirred it out of habit anyway, staring at the swirl of darkness inside. A young soldier at the counter glanced over. "Ma'am, were you in the service?" She smiled faintly. "Once." He hesitated. "What unit?" She looked at him, steady, unreadable. "You wouldn't know it," she said. He grinned. "Try me." She sipped her coffee. "We called ourselves the ones who came back, but not whole." The soldier frowned, unsure how to respond. She set a few bills on the table, rose and left. Outside, the desert wind met her like an old friend. She walked toward her truck, sunlight dying behind her. The horizon shimmered gold, the same color it had been the day the Death Brigade was born. For a long moment, she stood still, eyes closed, breathing in the air of a world that would never know her name. Then she whispered, almost smiling, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And she drove away into the endless, merciful light.